All right. Hey, all. Welcome to our second World War II lecture. Today, we're covering Pearl Harbor. So if you remember talking about the causes, how we got to World War II and went through the years of crisis of the 1920s for a lot of the world, including Germany, 1930s, we're added into the fray of years of crisis. So in that 20 years between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, it's really how we see the war erupt, is those things happening in the background, long-term causes, the short-term events that happen. So thanks for tuning into that lecture. This is now getting sort of coming back to America. We know what's happening in America during the 1920s, roaring 20s, 1930s, the Great Depression. Now we're into the 1940s. So if you remember, Poland is invaded by Germany in 1939. This becomes the last straw for the Allies at that time, just Britain and France. America, we are supporting the Allies, specifically Great Britain, because France gets destroyed pretty quickly by Nazi Germany and Italy. And so we're really supporting Great Britain through all of 1940 pretty much and into 1941 until we get to a fateful day in 1941, December 7th, 1941. That is the one day I want you to remember all year. If you remember no other date, just remember that date. It's really pivotal in terms of the American history that we talk about this year, from the Civil War, Reconstruction, Gilded Age, where we started, all the way to modern day. And so that is the one date really that I want you to remember. December 7th, 1941 is the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And that's what we're talking about in this lecture. So again, grab your notes, tune in to this lecture. It's going to be a bit different because I'm just going to cover the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, as well as the historical significance. So that piece is presented in just the 5 W's. Okay, and so here we see pictures. This is the day of December 7th, 1941. And there's battleships, and I'll show you a map so you understand where Pearl Harbor is at and all that good stuff. And then this is the same spot that you see burning in 1941. Here it is today. So these are pictures coming from a colleague of mine, but I've also been to Pearl Harbor and taken very similar pictures. And so kind of an interesting, very revered, one of our most popular war memorial sites in the United States is what's called the USS Arizona Memorial. And it's here. You go there, behind this picture, behind my colleague taking it, is the interpretive center, the historical center for Pearl Harbor. And then you get on a little ferry boat and you drive out to this white building. Maybe you've seen pictures of it before, but it's this white kind of upside down canoe shaped that's sitting on top of the bridge of a battleship that was destroyed in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And that's the USS Arizona. You can't really, you can kind of see it in this picture right here. It's sinking down. It literally gets destroyed and sinks, and it is still there to this day. That's what this white upside down canoe is on top of, is the sunken ship USS Arizona, which sunk in Pearl Harbor. And so it's still like a kind of a living memorial. No one ever exhumed it, took it up, pulled it up. They took off like the guns that were above the water level, but anything underwater they did not. And why? Because over 1,000 men are going to lose their lives on this ship. Just in that ship alone, there's going to be another 2,000 that are going to lose their lives being on other ships or at airfields that were bombed by the Japanese. But 1,000 men are going to die on the USS Arizona. So they didn't want to like bring them up, and there was no rescuing because a lot of them were just entombed. There was no way for them to get out, and they are going to drown. And so the Navy decided not to exhume those bodies and just sort of leave it as a memorial. And so it's kind of eerie as you go there, and it's kind of cool in a way that their memory is being preserved forever, and all 1,000 of them are still remaining on board that ship, even though their lives were lost. And then kind of a cool thing for history's sake, this is the USS Missouri, okay, which I've been on this ship. So here's the USS Arizona, where World War II starts. What happens on the USS Missouri, another World War II battleship that survives the war is that this is where the Japanese signed the surrendering to America and ending World War II for us. So at one sort of national historical site, you can see the beginning of World War II, where it began, and also the end in terms of fighting the Japanese, which is really cool. I really enjoyed it. Encourage you all to go to Hawaii. It's on the island of Oahu. And if you ever get there, go to Pearl Harbor. It's one of our top, again, American history locations. So who's the who of the W for who is going to be involved? Well, for the Japanese are going to be under Hideki Tojo. He's the prime minister, like military leader and ruler. And again, if you remember our causes, then there's also an emperor, but he's just revered. He doesn't really have any power. He's just worshipped. And his name is Emperor Hirohito. So he doesn't tell necessarily Tojo what to do. Tojo makes his own sort of decisions. He was the one that decided to expand the power of Japan throughout, from leaving the islands of Japan and going throughout Asia. And then his kind of second in command is, his name is General Yamamoto, and he was a military genius. He actually spent over a decade here in America going to school. He went to UC Berkeley, and then another school was at Stanford, but had lived in America for a decade, was familiar with American ways, and really loved America. And he told Hideki Tojo, when Tojo was like, you need to get America involved, we need to bomb them, we need to invade them, and eventually expand our dominance over the Pacific Ocean. Yamamoto was the guy that told Tojo, no, you don't want to get America involved. Once, and he described it as, you're going to awaken the sleeping giant. Leave America sleeping, then we can do whatever we want. But once you attack them and awaken that sleeping giant, eventually it's going to mean the end of us, because you don't know them like I do. And he ended up foretelling really what ended up happening. So, but he's in command of Japanese naval fleet, which has aircraft carriers, and it's from those aircraft carriers that are going to be launched airplanes at Pearl Harbor that are the ones that are going to be bombing Pearl Harbor. And so who's in Pearl Harbor? Well, it's for the United States, it's our Pacific Fleet. Like our whole Pacific Fleet was in San Francisco, California, but because of Japan's aggression in the Pacific, we decided, or FDR makes the decisions, he's commander in chief, to move the Pacific Fleet to Hawaii, which at that time wasn't a state, it's just a territory. Decided to move our fleet there to sort of counter this aggression happened from the Japanese. So kind of set us up for an attack. I mean, we were just trying to tell the Japanese, hey, we're here, we're watching, we can quickly respond if there's issues that are coming. So there better not be any issues though. And no one really could have foretold. There's allegations that FDR knew that the Japanese were gonna attack us, and he didn't do anything to get us into the war. But those are kind of scant claims that are made about how much FDR really knew. Okay, so, but they were moved to Hawaii in the summer of 1941 to deter Japan's aggression. And so what happens is there's an aerial attack. So these Japanese aircraft carriers come and basically set up outside of Oahu, outside of Hawaii, undetected. We didn't know that they were there. And from those aircraft carriers, they launched their planes. It's both fighter planes and then torpedo planes. The torpedoes carrying the bombs that are guided just below the surface and sink big ships. And so it was launched by Japan against the United States at Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor is the name of just like this natural harbor within Oahu. And I'll show you another map of it. And that was one of the strong reasons why America took possession of Hawaii in the 1880s, as we wanted control of Pearl Harbor so that we could, dock ships there, So, and here's a couple of the air bases. We also had several air bases, airfields around Pearl Harbor as well. So, okay. Oops, I clicked on the picture and it led me astray. All right, now not the picture. All right, so where is Pearl Harbor? Again, so this is the island of Oahu. There's several islands that make up the island chains of the Hawaiian Islands. My wife is Hawaiian, so we've been a couple of times. But here's Pearl Harbor at the southern end of Oahu. And so this map isn't the best because it's actually, there's an island in the middle. It's not, it's so shallow, you can't necessarily go around, but Pearl Harbor is this naturally deep water sort of harbor on the island of Oahu. And so if you fly into Honolulu, you fly over here, and then from the airport, the most popular beach in Hawaii is Waikiki here on the island of Oahu, where they have all those big hotels. And then this is Diamond Head down here, that big mountain that you can see. And so really, if you're flying into Oahu, you've seen and flown over, been around Pearl Harbor, you can see it pretty easily because it's naturally on the South Shore. A lot of people go to the North Shore. This is where a lot of the surfing is at. And so a lot of U.S. military bases around this island as well. So here's a close-up. We were looking at Pearl Harbor in that last. So now if we're looking specifically at this island and in Pearl Harbor, this is what we would see on the day of December 7th, 1941. And so again, we are docking our whole Navy, basically, that's on the West Coast in the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii to deter Japan's aggression. And so our battleships did not suspect that we were going to be attacked, any of our ships. No one suspected an attack coming from Japan because we were still talking with each other, communicating. We weren't liking what Japan was doing, but it didn't mean that we were going to stop them. And so we literally are parking our ships like right next to each other, which is not what you do if you're at war, because they're vulnerable to attack, right? And so here's what was called Battleship Row. So you come into the inlet of Pearl Harbor right here, and then you dock these ships. And these are tremendously big battleships, and then they are stacked next to each other again, which you wouldn't do in wartime, but just in peacetime. And then this island, this is Ford Island, has an airfield here, and then Henderson Airfield is down here. Okay, but these, and you see how much they were damaged. The Nevada was right here. Then this is the Arizona. This is the Vestal, which they were able to bring up after it was partially sunk and repair. West Virginia, it flipped over and rolled over. Oklahoma, utterly destroyed. And Tennessee and Maryland, Neosho, made it out, not necessarily unscathed, but not as bad. And then California sunk too. And here's another picture. So we were just looking at this part just on this last slide. So it's turned a little bit, but again, you're seeing the battleships, and the red is sunk. The orange is severely damaged. The yellow is moderately damaged. And then over here, this is also like part of Battleship Row. These are smaller, what are called destroyers. They're not battleships. They're smaller than battleships. They're called destroyers. This is where our aircraft carriers would have been parked if our aircraft carriers would have been there. They're out running exercises, and it was sort of our saving grace that they weren't there, because they would have been utterly destroyed too. And our whole fleet in the Pacific would have been crippled, and we would have had no response. We would have been severely fearful of the Japanese invading the United States if we didn't have our aircraft carriers still alive. Okay. And then here's a picture. You see 2 months before Pearl Harbor, before December 7th. This is October 30th, 1941. And so again, you see Battleship Row. There's only couple battleships there. And these are cruisers. These are the destroyers. And then this is Ford Island, the airstrip. This is Henderson Airfield. Okay. And so here's where it's this little island right here. This is the Pearl Harbor Interpretive Center. And then you take the little ferry and you go wing, and then you go sit on the Arizona. It's right there, actually, right there. So pretty cool. Now all this is developed. Like, this is huge, like housing, military area over here. So it looks completely different because it's completely developed. Oh, I clicked on the picture again and led me away. All right, moving on to the next. So here are pictures actually taken by Japanese airplanes as they're flying in during phase 1 of the attack, which I think is really cool pictures. So here's Battleship Row, and I can't remember the name of this ship, but this is the Arizona right here, and then this is the one docked right next to it. And again, this is West Virginia, and I think this was California, right? And then Oklahoma. And so you see them just lined up, but you're seeing that this picture's taken right as the attack commences, and airplanes have already dropped torpedoes into the water. And so here's a close-up of the same picture right here, and you can see the rooster tails of the torpedo. Here's the rectangular object, which is the torpedoes that have been dropped. And so one torpedo is going here to the West Virginia. It's labeled right there. That's helpful. And then the other is going to Oklahoma. And both ships are going to be severely damaged. The West Virginia is the one that literally flips over all the way. Yeah. Pretty incredible. And then here's a aerial view from the Japanese planes after the attack has happened, which I think is really cool. It says photograph from a Japanese aircraft. So you're seeing the ships, they're all listed there, and they're actually gushing oil out into the ocean because they've been destroyed. Right here, this is the Arizona. You're seeing it right as there's a bomb. It wasn't hit by a torpedo. There was also airplanes that were bombing. So a bomb went right through the front, which is where all sort of the black powder and the gunpowder was housed. And the bomb went through the first deck down into the second deck. And that's where it exploded in the gunpowder room, which literally, as eyewitnesses said, made the ship jump out of the water because it's a tremendous explosion. And then it splits in two, and then it sits down back in the water and actually under the water. So that's why over 1,000 men were there. They never got a chance to get out because the ship blew up and sunk before they ever had a chance. Okay. And so here's a picture of that bomb hitting the Arizona. So it's coming down and like direct hit, right? And the gunpowder is blowing up. So you see the shot of just gunpowder going straight up, as well as the huge explosion as the front basically is blown out. Okay. So tremendously awesome pictures, which happened to coordinate right at the time. And so then here is the Arizona. This is the one that's burning after the attack. So you see it like goes up, splits, comes down, and then kind of like teeters over to the edge. Okay, and then here's a picture of the Arizona again. So this is the one that was outside of the Arizona, and then this is the Arizona basically in the water and in flames, and it's leaking like oil, and the oil around it is burning. So it's to this tremendous fireball as well. And so here's, I believe this is the next day after the attack, if I remember right. And so you see here's that ship that was on the edge, and it's just leaking oil going out of Pearl Harbor in the Pacific Ocean. And then, am I right? So here's West Virginia. Here's the one that's spun over and twirled over. And then this is, I thought this was the Arizona. Maybe I was wrong, but maybe it's this one right here because it's completely sunk. So, okay. And so again, when did this attack happen on Pearl Harbor? It was Sunday. It was a Sunday, which is why no one suspected an attack. They were waking up. It's like 7 a.m. To 8 a.m. So people are getting ready to go to church, or they're sleeping in. It's kind of like the day off in the Navy. So a lot of people were just stuck on their boats. They weren't expecting anything. They hadn't gotten up yet, or they're just going about and doing their sort of duties as being a Navy man. And so again, here's some more pictures from up above. Yeah, so pretty incredible stuff. And then this is the explosion of the Arizona from farther away. So a better picture, but farther away. Can just see how devastating it was. So my grandfather-in-law was actually in Pearl Harbor. He was about this far away, and he talked to his dying day about seeing the bombing of Pearl Harbor in person and what a traumatic effect it had on him, and really changed his life. He came to the mainland after that, after he served in the Merchant Marine. But so why would Japan attack us when we were at peace with them, had no inclinations there was going to be an attack? Well, number one reason is they wanted to remove and immobilize our U.S. fleet in the Pacific. So if they crippled and destroyed our battleships and our aircraft carriers, which they hoped that were also going to be there, which weren't, then we couldn't respond to whatever they were going to do in the Pacific. Now, our Atlantic fleet was already by this time like engaged in the Atlantic Ocean. They're looking for subs now, are not actively at war, but they have to be over there to counter what Germany and Italy are doing. And they're not necessarily fighting them and destroying them, but they were already out. So if we only had them and they had to serve in both oceans, we would have been fighting on both sides, which would have been incredibly tough to defend any of our land and resources, territories. So it was a big deal for Japan to destroy them. And it was also because in retaliation, because we refused to trade oil with Japan. Again, Japan's an island nation. They don't have oil reserves that they can drill up and use the crude oil in whatever way they want. So they had to trade for things that they didn't have, especially oil and steel. And so as they're getting more crazy and more aggressive in Asia, we're like, no, we're stopping trading with you because we don't want to help enable you to continue to conquer more countries and territories. And so then the last thing is it meant to draw us into World War II, of which Japan felt they were stronger, and they were stronger. They have already been for the last 10 years. Throughout the 30s, they had conquered China, they had conquered parts of Russia, they've made it into Southeast Asia and were making incursions there. And so it really looked like no one could counter sort of their aggression and their military might. And at that time, America's military was not strong. Our Navy was probably pretty strong, but our battleships were from the 1900s under Teddy Roosevelt. And so they were really old. And so Japan thought this was the opportunity to get us into World War II and have us pull into a quick surrender where we give up a lot of our Pacific territories and, eventually maybe be invaded. That was a great fear, especially in this area, was that we were going to be invaded by the Japanese and taken over. So the historical significance, what happens with the bombing of Pearl Harbor? Well, the very next day, December 8th, Congress, a joint session, both the House and the Senate, you have 535 members of Congress, plus the president. He goes and gives an 8-minute speech, and he just says about Pearl Harbor, it's a date which will live in infamy. We'll remember December 7, 1941, just like that poster says, forever. And that's the one date I want you to remember yourself, forever. And what it does is push us from being an isolated country. Hey, this is a European problem. Hey, this is an Asian problem. This isn't a North American problem. To it pushes us firmly into wars. We have close to 3,000 servicemen that die in this attack. So it's kind of like, 9/11 is kind of like our generation thing, even before you were alive, really. But it's just like people remember where they were when that happened, and it changed life after that event and pushed us to war, like in Afghanistan and Iraq. But this was that generation's kind of 9/11. So here's the numbers. The Navy's going to lose 4 Navy battleships and 4 are severely damaged. We're able to repair them and use them. 3 destroyers damaged, 3 cruisers damaged, 188 aircraft, 2,400 people killed, another 1,100 people wounded. You also see civilians there. The Japanese attacked a hospital in Pearl Harbor, and those were mainly the civilians that were killed were those that were at that hospital, which is tremendous brutality. And there's going to be a lot of Americans upset about that too. And there's about, 1,000 people wounded, 35 of them civilians, mostly at that hospital. Japan is going to have very minor losses. So tremendous victory in terms of a military operation for them. They're going to lose 29 aircraft. They had 5 midget submarines. These are one-man submarines that had a torpedo basically, and they went up into Pearl Harbor and tried to launch their torpedoes. Now, we knew on the day of the attack that there might be something fishy because one of these midget submarines ran up onto the beach, and that guy that was in that midget submarine got out. Of course, he's speaking Japanese. He's in a uniform. He quickly gets captured and taken into the police station, but we don't necessarily know. The communication doesn't go from the police station to the military to say, hey, we caught this guy. It didn't go fast enough. It does go, but not fast enough for the people that were in command of the Navy at Pearl Harbor to be like, oh, there's about to be an attack. And actually the military commander of the fleet of the Navy was playing golf on Sunday morning, and he ends up getting demoted after it because of his sort of lack of response. We also had radar towers, which was a new invention at the time in Oahu, and they detected that all these waves of airplanes were coming, but they wrote them off thinking that they were American bombers that were flying exercises over in the ocean. So we had some couple early indicators that there was going to be a big attack the morning of, and that communication didn't get relayed to our general command that could have ramped up and got into battle stations. And then Japan's going to lose 64 servicemen as well. Again, here's some more pictures. This is the Arizona again. And so literally they chop off and salvage all this steel that's above the water. And then you can see kind of, here it is laying on the bottom. And so they take off basically everything above. And then what they do is they put, this is like that canoe shape, but looking sideways on top. So you're seeing like 2 different sort of profiles of the ship and what you're seeing. So there's a little bit above the water line right here, and I'll show you a picture of it. And then this is right below the water line. So pretty incredible, kind of eerie to be on it too. And here's an aerial picture of it. So here's the Arizona, and here's that one turret that's above the water, right? and then you take the ferry boat and it docks and you get off and you're literally like walking. It has this whole center area open to looking down into the boat. And it's a really cool memorial. Here's another picture of it. And so here's when you get off the ferry boat on the dock and you're walking up into this memorial, kind of like a museum on top of the USS Arizona. And you can look out windows on the side and again, look down into the ship. And in the far end, it has the names of everyone that lost their lives on the USS Arizona. So it says, to the memory of the gallant men here entombed and their shipmates who gave their lives in action on December 7th, 1941 on the USS Arizona. And a cool thing, and there still are some survivors that were on the USS Arizona and did not perish and fought in World War II and survived that and lived out their life. And many of them have chosen, and said, hey, I want to be entombed back in the USS Arizona with all my shipmates, some of my friends, maybe my best friends. And so as these people die of old age, the USS Navy actually will take their cremated remains and bury them in the USS Arizona onto the ship. Now there's only 3 that are remaining, and about every year for the past, since the World War II has been over, as these gentlemen were getting older and dying, this was happening pretty frequently. But in the last 10 years, we had the last one happen about 5 years ago. There's still 3 Pearl Harbor survivors, USS Arizona survivors that remain, but all 3 said that they are not going to be entombed or interred on the USS Arizona. And so they add their names. They have a special spot. I don't think I took a picture of that one. And then there's also people of the Marines that died on the USS Arizona too. But here's looking down on the ship and it's all rusted, but it's growing coral too. Fish are living there and stuff. And then you see like this oil slick that's leaving the USS Arizona. That again, the Navy never came and they got all the oil off. It's just been leaking a little bit. And yeah, it is leaking in the ocean, causing pollution. But again, it's sort of preserving the lives, over the 1,000 lives that were lost on the USS Arizona, and not trying to touch or disturb their tomb, essentially. Okay, and here's the one turret of the big cannon that sticks out and is visible above the waterline. And so you're seeing it from sort of the memorial looking out, and you see it. So, and then you're looking down and you see the whole profile of the ship below you. And again, here's a better picture of like that oil slick. They actually call it the Arizona's tears, crying tears of oil for the tears of the lives that were lost aboard the USS Arizona. So, okay, so that's going to end our talk about Pearl Harbor. Hopefully you remember the date, December 7th, 1941. That will be on the test for sure. And I know you can look it up, but I'm hoping that you do it from memory. And then number 2, it's going to catapult us into World War II. So as we continue to talk about World War II, we're going to talk after December 7th, 1941. And what is America going to do? How are we going to battle? What's going to happen here in America? What's going to happen in sort of the world? And what is America's response going to be? So that's coming up in our next lecture, and we'll continue to read Mouse and enjoy what we're doing with that. But thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this was informative and interesting and keeps you engaged. All right. Thanks, you guys.